Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. John Yearwood, Executive Board Chairman at International Press Institute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Way to go. Well, we're about to be part of, all of us, one of the most important part of what we're doing here this week is to hear from our emerging leaders. So we have 5 outstanding emerging leaders that are going to make 1-minute pitches to you, and you'll see that on the screens. And after they're done, if you are able to help them, hand, and we'll come to you, and you can talk about how you might be helpful. Okay. So and then also too, if you have questions while they're speaking, please take out your Spot Me and write the questions, and we'll be able to see the questions on those screens, and then we'll be able to get some answers to the questions that you have. So we'll get started with Tamika Hill from Jamaica. Please help me welcome her. Tamika, 60 seconds. Oh, microphone. There we go. Okay, that didn't. There we go.
Everyone, as you heard, my name is Tamika Hill, and I'm from Jamaica. The high rate of illiteracy within my hometown has made the fight against crime an even more challenging one. Last year, over 235,000 Jamaicans were identified as illiterate, and that's why I started my foundation, the Tamika Hill Foundation, Love to Read, Learn to Lead. Through my foundation, children 6 months to 12 years have access to reading books, school gears, and supply. Through the Star Award program, we're able to assist students who are performing well academically. Finally, by hiring hard teachers, we're able to have children 3 to 12 years in beginning stages.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Tamika, but the time is no one's friend. Next, we'll move to Nora Alch from Morocco.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we all consume food on the daily and throw it away without really thinking about the outcome. The private sector loses millions as food gets wasted and thrown away, while some people continue to be hungry. I mean, even at this conference today, if every plate that was left unfinished could go to someone in need, I believe that we can incentivize the private sector to help recycle and reduce waste loss, which is why I'm calling on all the key actors of the food industry to get involved. This project, this waste management project, which aims to help reduce costs for the private sector and enable them to reduce waste while distributing it and making it useful again. So let's save money while improving lives.
Time. Thank you. Next, Jessica Berlin from Germany.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. This year's theme at the Atlantic Dialogue, and I couldn't agree more. At my company, Construct, we work to turn innovative ideas for how to do economic development in emerging and frontier markets better into concrete, testable realities. And one of the projects I'd like to share with you today that we work on is called the New Berlin Conference. We are working to reverse the legacy of the Berlin Conference of 1885 by convening a new platform for African-led leadership, bringing together leaders from the public, private, and nonprofit civil society sectors to forge a new, concrete, action-driven path for economic development and show Europe and the OECD donors how they can partner as equals with African-led
time.
please find me in the coffee break. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Now we move to Richard Seshi from the Ivory Coast. Richard.
Hello. So my sister graduated from computer science among the top of her class in Polytechnic Namibia, but she couldn't pursue a career in tech. So when more women pursue careers in tech, we all win. My initiative, Zuriel, wants to identify throughout Africa tech graduates, train them into world-class developers for free for 6 months, and then match their expertise with. We're raising 90,000 USD to open our first institute in Côte d'Ivoire. Even better, you can sponsor one female developer for 1,500 USD today. My name is Richard. Please talk to me over Mobokanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Now we'll move to Cristian Botan from Romania. Cristian.
Hi, everyone. Corruption, bureaucracy, nepotism, lack of integrity, these are issues that all of the countries of the world are facing. Technology has the opportunity to change that, where citizens have the opportunity to evaluate the way public institutions are going and basically say if government is doing it. That's the website. You're going to get to this screen over here. Where you'll be able to search, for example, for Rabat, the capital of this great country, and you'll manage to provide us with an evaluation of our Romanian embassy here in Rabat. So we have 14,000 profiles of all the public institutions in Romania, hospitals, schools, city halls, police stations, whatever you like, and this is something that can be replicable all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristian. Now, is there anyone in the audience? We have about probably less than that, probably about 3 or 4 minutes. If anyone in the audience to any of our 5 emerging leaders, please raise your hand and we'll identify you. That's one. And if you're still thinking about how you can be helpful, what we invite you to do is after the next session, during the coffee break, the young leaders will all be in the break area, and we invite you to find them and talk to them about how you can be helpful. And also, too, we've had a number of presentations from other young and emerging leaders. We invite you to also, as you see them around the conference over the next few days, please stop by and talk to them about their presentations and how you can be helpful. Any final comments, thoughts before we break for the next session? Break, and we'll be back in about 2 or 3 minutes with our next session, which is about Africa and the superpowers. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will start in a few seconds. Thank you.
Africa's geopolitics is characterized by abundant natural resources, as well as a desire of African countries to deepen their integration with each other and to forge stronger links with the world's traditional and emerging superpowers. In addition to natural resources, the interest from superpowers in Africa span control of irregular migration, infectious disease, and terrorism. The superpowers also want to position themselves in Africa's potentially very large markets. What interests and objectives for Europe, the United States, and China in Africa? How can African countries leverage off the interests of the superpowers to achieve their own development objectives? Can cooperation with Africa enhance its geopolitical weight?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome again on the stage Mr. John Yearwood.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're on this side. And it's good to be back with you. We're about to engage in I think one of the most important sessions that we'll be involved with over the next few days. And I invite you to use social media. You can tweet, Instagram, you can WeChat, whatever means you're most comfortable, whether you want to tweet in English, Spanish, French, Swahili, whatever you want will accommodate you. Because I think this is a really important conversation that I think people around the world, those who are here in the audience and those who are following us wherever in the world you are, to participate in. We have a real powerhouse panel to discuss these issues, and I think we should get started. So would like to introduce the panel now. We'll start with, from the United States, the President of the German Marshall Fund, Karen Donfried. The European Union, Ana Palacio, the former Foreign Minister of Spain and a member of the Council of Spain. Next, we'll have Fathallah Sijilmassi. He's the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Then we'll have Xiang, who is professor at the Graduate Institute of Geneva. And then Aminata Touré, the former Prime Minister of Senegal. Please join me in welcoming the panel. Let's start, since we're going to Africa and the superpowers, let's start with the first question, which will actually be posed to you all. And invite you to vote. And the question is, do the superpowers really care about Africa? And your choices are yes, no, or I don't care. So if you would, you have about a minute to vote, and then we'll proceed with our questions after you have answered. And we just have a few seconds left, and we're about to see the results. Interesting. So now we'll get started, and we'll talk first with Karen from the United States. Karen, a lot of people in Africa and elsewhere are wondering, what is the U.S. policy toward the continent? It's been a year or so since Mr. Trump was elected. A lot of people are still waiting. Some people have asked, does he care if it does not involve a Trump Tower? Please, does the U.S. care about Africa?
Well, it's a totally fair question, and I want to jump in on that. I first just want to give a shout out to all of GMF's friends at the OCP Policy Center for taking Atlantic Dialogues forward. It's just been so impressive, the forum is, and it's great to be a part of it. U.S. policy toward Africa, there are a lot of people that policy looks like under President Trump. And it's hard to make the case that the Trump administration has articulated a comprehensive policy to Africa in the first year that it's been in power. And I think after decades of bipartisan support in the U.S. for a policy toward the region that has a diplomatic component, an economic component, a development component, a military component, we're missing that. I think it's for a couple of reasons that we haven't yet seen that policy arise. One is, in general, we have seen the Trump administration over soft power. So I think that comprehensive strategy missing in the case of Africa is very much a reflection of broader policy priorities. And if we look, for example, at President Trump's budget, there was a proposed 29% cut for the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development. And in part, that was because they needed those budget savings to go to increasing budget for the Pentagon. The other thing that we've seen is the State Department in particular moving very slowly on filling positions. So 1 year in, we still do not have an Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. We only have one confirmed Assistant Secretary of State, and that's actually for Europe and Eurasia. So Africa is not alone in that, but the person you would look to be the architect of U.S. diplomacy toward the region is missing. And when we think more specifically about President Trump, he's of course not someone who is shy to share his views. I'm not sure there have been tweets on Africa to date. And in fact, the one opportunity, very public opportunity he had at the G20 to participate in the session on partnership with Africa, that was a session that President Trump did not attend. And the reason we all know about that is because what did get a tremendous honk took the chair during that session on partnership with Africa. So all of that has led to express concern about a militarization of U.S. policy toward Africa, because we have seen an increase in U.S. military presence in Africa in response to the growing Islamic insurgent threat that's there, particularly in West Africa. So that would be my sense of where U.S. policy is today.
Thank you, Karen. Let's move to China. Lanxin, China has gotten some criticism, and indeed we heard some of it here yesterday, that for its lack of apparent interest in promoting good governance and human rights in Africa. What's the view from building palaces and concert halls on the continent?
Certainly not. I think China has a tremendous interest in Africa for a long time. This is not first time China in Africa. We were there since 60s, 70s, but at that point, if you recall, for different reasons, the Chinese are very much interested in exporting a radicalized idea of global revolution. So we basically provide the free aid at that point, including, of course, the Tanzania-Zambia Railway and all those big projects. But the second entry, as we all know, at the late the 20th strategy, I would say they have two stages. One is the starting with going out strategy, which is emphasizing energy, a bit like the colonial kind of trade idea. But the recent years, however, it's already transformed into something else. That is beginning to emphasize a more multidimensional development issues. I think Chinese not only establishing a manufacturing industry, but also having hospitals, education. But most impressively is the idea of help Africa building transportation networks and infrastructures. So I don't really think it's fair to say the Chinese not care about governance per se, but the just Africa is non-interference with anybody's internal affairs. I don't think Chinese ever would give up that idea. Some rumors recently say maybe Chinese had a role in Zimbabwe coup, but there is no evidence here, okay? Despite that general's prior visit to China. So I don't think this is a sound argument. But my last point would be the recent change has a lot to do with China's beginning to forming a grand strategy, which is the Belt and the Road strategy, which Africa has become a very important region for that. I believe it's not Mahan, it's not Mackinder, as many in the West say. It is more like, I would say, ambition, if you will, to provide an alternative way for global governance, for the development. Okay. I don't think they want to export model. Chinese don't like the word model. They never use that. They never want to export China model into Africa. But they do want to show how this Beltway, Belt Road project or initiative may help their governance and improve their economic well-being.
Thank you, Lanxin. We'll move to your chairmate, Fathallah. A lot of what we've been seeing on television and reading in the media have had to do with refugees and the treatment in the Mediterranean of African refugees. What's the view from the Mediterranean?
Thank you very much, John, and hello to everybody. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to say that I'm speaking today as an African. I'm Moroccan. I am African. So I'm not talking about Africa, but I'm talking as an African, talking about his continent and the future of our lives. Privilege to be working in at present. It includes all of North Africa. North Africa is Africa. And therefore, everything that we are conducting within the Union for the Mediterranean is directly connected to enhancing the potential of a certain part of Africa, which is North Africa, because this is the geographical scope of the Union. But beyond that, we all know, challenge. There's not one issue that does not imply the connection between North and talking about the part of the world that I'm dealing with for the moment. And therefore, I think we have to take a step back from the institutions, which are, of course, tools that are there to enable action on the ground, but to have a look at the global picture, which is the global vision of Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa, because this is an area where, as you mentioned, a certain number of impacts and consequences are. From this global perspective, and this is why I think it is very important to have a zoom. First of all, that we should stop talking about Africa with the use of the future. Africa is present. Africa is not the future. Africa is the present. It is a huge potential for the future, but we are talking about now. We are talking about youth. When I heard the young people who have made brilliant pitches, and by the way, I encourage all of you to answer positively and favorably to the pitches that have been presented earlier, and I would like to personally encourage all of you. This is the climate transition, the energy transition. This is now. want to mention the necessity of mobilities. Human mobilities are part of modernity. So we have to look at this human capital that we have collectively, because this is an asset for our region. And when I say our region, it's again the Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the role of the private sector. I believe in mobilizing the assets. I believe in empowering the positive agenda of our region. I believe in opening doors, not only to this global region that I'm referring to, but beyond the US, scoring goals and making sure that the present is a strong asset for the future.
Let's move to one of your colleagues from the European Union, and we'll bring Anna into the conversation. Anna, you're certainly from a part of the world that has colonized millions of people on this continent. Many people haven't forgiven you for that, not you, but certainly the part of the world you're from. What's the view from there now?
Well, okay. First of all, I'm happy to be here. As time is of the essence, I will say thank you. I mean, I will pick up where Fathallah Sijilmassi left it. Africa is present. If we continue in this discussion where just have bad conscience about colonization and feel guilty, and they focus Africa on aid and trying to separate this and bring aid, and if Africans go on saying, well, all the problems come from colonialism, we will not be in the present, absolutely not in the future, we will be in the past. What has changed is that today there is a present, and certainly there is a future. And the Abidjan Summit, European Union, African Union is that. And I fully agree, there are macro regions today. There is the Americas, there is the Asian, and there is the One Road, One Belt, but Europe, Africa, and this is a reality. Today we can do this because in the Europe there is a perception that the issue interpolates all of us. And the Africans have realized that by blaming colonization, you don't go far on this conversation. And this morning it was mentioned the intervention by the president of Ghana when he was visited by Macron. African responsibility is African responsibility. And this is something that allows a partnership, a real partnership, not a fake one. Europe has this issue of migration, but we see the development of Africa in these infrastructure projects, and this is a present for us. So, in summary, we have the psychological, social ambience to establish this real partnership. Abidjan was a good start, and we have to work. And there I will go back to the Mediterranean, because there will be a policy of France, French politics in Africa, and Great Britain, and everybody will have. We need to establish European Union as a whole, and the interlocutor has to be African Union and the Union pour la Méditerranée, the Mediterranean Union, because we need this institutionalization of these partner infrastructures, as you said, to address education, to address mobility. And I fully agree with you, we have to speak about mobility. So, positive, and just honestly, thanks goodness that on the both sides of the Mediterranean, we are more realistic about how to engage in this dialogue.
Madam Prime Minister, you've heard what the other superpowers had to say. What are your thoughts? Too much talk about colonization?
Well, I like to be. I was being reminded by one of my history professor that one of the emperors was called Kanka Musa, way back when he visited Mecca. He was one of the first emperors to visit Mecca. He came with such a wealth that everybody was at his knees. To say that Africa has a history. You cannot summarize Africa, without looking at the past. But the past goes beyond colonization and slavery. That is also to be said to our young people. Starting by the United States, maybe we're paying for having, had the father of one of your presidents. That was, we're paying for that. But I also like the approach, do not touch, do not harm. So maybe we should leave it the way it is, if you see what I mean. When it comes to Europe, the history is a long history. But we cannot also forget and just wipe off the table the history of colonization and the way the past of Africa has been stopped by slavery and history. You cannot just say, it's over, it's over. No, the consequences are still here. If I'm speaking French, that's because I was colonized by the French, and if not colonized by the Spanish. So that is a reality, but the reality is not going to define us. What we are looking forward, and this is the Africa you are not seeing in the news. I used to say that we do have the word public relation policy. It's happening in Africa. A lot of great things are happening. This is the continent that is making the highest economic growth. Okay, we have issues, it has to be better chaired, but it's here. When people are talking about 2, 3, Senegal is 6.5, we're going to be 7 next year, and it's not unusual. You go to Abidjan, to Cote d'Ivoire, it's a 2-digit. So we are moving forward. Africa has the fastest growing middle class, which means purchasing power, which means trade in the international news. So we have to define our own present. That is for people working in the media and the governments. We have to bring the good news. I used to say that we need to change completely the narrative. The narrative is changing. We still have our challenges, and we are not running away from them. As a former prime minister, I know that we do need to make effort in terms of bringing our rural areas up to par compared to the rurals. We do know that. We know that we need to have quality education. But at the same time, we are making huge progress. If you look into life expectancies, it has increased a lot. So these are the real story of Africa. And the way we talk about us as subject of observation, of discussion, that needs to well. How do we want to define ourselves compared to the rest of the world? Africa has the largest surface of lands. We are going to be feeding the rest of the world. We have to get ready for that. So these are the assets that we have to manage very well and to manage properly. And we have to also talk within ourselves. And the brother from the region said that he sees himself as African, and I like to see that. But that message has to be conveyed to the rest of North Africa. Because when you see the pictures on TV of black male being sold, you have the whole continent, sub-Saharan continent, being extremely upset. And this is going to damage the relationship that... So my message also to the intellectual from the North Africa's countries is to speak up against this, is to fight it very aggressively. A country like Morocco that has historical link with sub-Saharan countries like Senegal has to speak up against racism. Because if we are to work together, if we are to trade together, this question has to be solved right now. And we know that we do welcome our brothers, but that is something that we need to work to unify the north of Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. That is going to determine the business we want, and for that, we need you to speak up and to fight against what we have seen. And this is also for Europe, because Europe is the land of human rights. But when we see the way migration is being dealt with, of course, Europe has the rights, the sovereignty to decide how many people are going to come into its territories. But at the same time, if you are the cradle of human rights, there are some situations that you cannot witness and just keep quiet. So this is also what is fueling, the anger among our youth. And you have a theory now that we should disconnect and be among ourselves and find the models. But that's not the way to go, certainly, because we would like also to continue to work with Africa, with Europe, because we would also have a history together, and with China. And for China, as you said, there is a long-time relationship. But at the same time, we don't want to develop the model that we saw in the past, that Africa will be the supermarket when you come and do your shopping and you leave. So that is not also what we are looking forward in our relationship with China. That has to be very well understood. What we would like to do is what you have done with European, technology transfer. We would like to have fair deals, and that's the way to go. And I can tell you that there is a new generation of leaders who lived in the West and who are completely, let's say, open-minded, but at the same time very aware of defending African interests. And that is a good thing, because the time is up to have equal discourse and equal relationship. But to do that, we have to be undiplomatic the way I did it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. You've said so much to unpack, and we'll try to do some of that here shortly. But first, let me remind the audience that you can go to your SpotMe devices if you have questions. We can put the questions up, and of course, don't forget to use social media to tell the world. I wanted to go to Karen, but before I do that, though, I couldn't help but go to Fathallah about the images of Africans being sold. And I'm just curious, how do you feel when you see that? See those images?
We all stand united in favor of humanity, in favor of our common values, certainly within the African continent. And solidarity is word number one. We share the same values, we share the same interests, we share the same history. Moroccan on and on about the deeply rooted Moroccan connections with Africa. And again, is Africa. North Africa is Africa. So when it comes to things that Prime Minister, Your Excellency, and I fully agree 150% with what she said, of course. When we see what happened, these are criminals. Just as we would condemn terrorism, just as we would condemn any human trafficking, we all know that when we have vulnerabilities in countries, in this case, such as Libya, where we are subject to seeing such things occur, and we have so there's absolutely no doubt about the strongest condemnation about what we have seen, and about the fact that we stand united. We stand united. If we need to say it out loud, and we do, we will say it, and we will continue saying it. But we are in full solidarity, because it is us. We are talking about us. We are talking about our own citizens, our own families. And this is why I just would like to confirm the line of what Her Excellency just said. And I think that just increases our strongest belief that we have to continue building on the assets of our region, to strengthen Africa, to strengthen all the networks, all the building on all the assets that we have. And again, I believe that youth is our strongest asset. And we will only be doing that not only by strengthening the confidence of what we represent, past, present, and future, but also doing it in an open and confident relation with all our international partners.
But Fathallah, it continues to happen in 2017. You stop it.
What is important is to continue, because the situation that is in Libya. So this is another subject. Libya is a subject as such. We know that we need to strengthen nation building, state building in Libya. But this is another subject. If you want to open it, we could open it, but this is another subject, okay? But certainly, we need to protect human rights all over the world. And I want to extend it even to the migrant situation in Europe, for example. It's important to keep this dimension of strengthening humanity in our development.
Something that struck me in talking about the way the U.S. views Africa. And she was uncharacteristically diplomatic in talking about the president's, maybe the former president's father. Is that, you think, one of the reasons why the U.S. has been hands-off this continent and there's so much confusion about what the U.S. position is?
Well, it's interesting because I focused on something else she said, which was quite striking, I thought, when talking about the U.S., that, you know, maybe do not touch, do not harm is what we should be hoping for right now. And I wouldn't argue that in his past, I think you had seen a bipartisan approach to Africa. I mean, if you look at what President Bush did during his administration, PEPFAR, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, there were some initiatives that I think were very positive in the U.S.-African relationship. And, you know, I think just as an American, it's sad to think we're at a place where our allies in Africa would look at the U.S. and say, frankly, we just as soon you ignore us because we don't see you as a force for good right now, but we actually think you do more harm. And my only concern with where U.S. policy is today, if that's the approach of don't do anything else, is that I think we continue to engage quite forcefully on the security side. And if we look at the security challenges that Africa faces, I don't think any of those challenges can be resolved solely through the use of military force or solely through security assistance partnerships. I think we really need to address the root causes of those conflicts, and that's where development assistance, economic growth, diplomacy become really important tools. And so that's my concern on that front about how the U.S. plays a role. But I thought the Prime Minister also opened up the issue of a post-American world. Are we heading to a place where the U.S. is choosing not to engage in certain things, which is leaving vacuums that other forces will fill? And that's also a really profoundly important question.
Let's go to China. I wanted to ask you about a question on human rights, come back to that, but I want to pick up, though, on what Karen said about this vacuum. I guess perhaps no one is happier than that, about this vacuum than China. How do you see that? The fact that...
well, the United States, it's not the first time they benign neglected Africa. They benign neglected in the 90s. So this is not a new opening for China. China's, before American in and out, China's already there, you know. So I don't think with President Trump, I have to say, it's a great news for China, no matter how you don't like it. But it's not because there is a vacuum, Chinese, they simply do not develop so far a conflictual vision against each other. What many Washington insiders would prefer to call Thucydides' trap. That means China-U.S. relations destined for confrontation, because China is going to challenge the United States position. Trump happened to be somebody who understood this extreme importance of repair what's been damaged by Obama administration of basic strategic trust between the United States and China. So I really don't think China is in a competitive mood as far as, even if Trump is withdrawing from Africa. That's my view. Yeah.
Does it open up an opportunity for Europe with Africa?
Well, certainly. I will insist on it will always be there. But we need to move forward, and this is why I mentioned this seminal speech by the President of Ghana. The future of Africa is for Africans to decide, for Africans to define. And I was just taking the example this morning of the World Bank deciding not to finance gas. Well, Africa will decide, and when I say Africa, African countries will decide what they need. And this is extremely important. And it creates an opportunity for Europe, because I think that Europe is now realistic about this perspective I mentioned, guilty feeling. But from a land of opportunities, and the Prime Minister mentioned, this is going to be the basket for the world. This agro industry is a fantastic area. Let me just highlight two issues. First, I mean, Africa is not Africa. Africa is the region in the world where economies are more enclaved. You don't have real regional. You have a spaghetti bowl of organizations that are regional, sub-regional, and all that, but you need a better approach as Africa, including the North African, the Mediterranean, so including the Maghreb. And I think that this is where Africa be beefed up and has to be put forward, because there are certain approaches where Africa needs the river, the Congo Basin, the big transport. I mean, until now you have, in many cases, from one capital in Africa to another. In many cases, you have to go to Europe to go back to Europe, and back to the other capital. This has to change. This is a challenge for Africa as Africa, and the same way that for us it's very difficult, and we still see each other as French or German or Spanish. You need to beef up this African perspective, including Morocco, the southern border of the Mediterranean. And my second thing, which comes out of Abidjan, prosperity will not be there without the private sector. We have seen, and this is a comparison that I know that for many African countries, it's difficult, but the way Asian countries have developed since the 60s. In the 60s, they were on par with African countries. Now there is this approach of giving an opportunity to the private sector. And the private sector needs security, physical security and legal security. And this is where governance comes back.
You know, I'm going to open it up to the audience in a minute, right after I ask this question of the Prime Minister. Madam Prime Minister, a basic question. Does Africa need these superpowers?
Of the world, and we don't want to disconnect ourselves. Although in our history, meeting the rest of the world has been quite little to us and stop us in our, emergent path, but yet, what is important is, and I totally agree with Madam Minister, is, and that's what African Union is trying to do. We have 54 countries within strong economies. Let me tell you that Nigeria has 4 times the GDP of Morocco. So it's a big economy. You have South Africa, you have Kenya coming up. I like to say also Senegal. And I do think that of the Francophone, the Anglophone, that is something that we really need to deal with. This, and then we'll deal with it. But when we come together, what we need to do is to come up with packages toward investors. If we could, and that was the idea of the NEPAD, which was the new partnership for Africa. If we come together and define what are the conditions for China, for Spain, for the US to invest in Africa. If we determine together what customary should be, if we do have common law throughout the continent, then we're going to be in a stronger position. That is what is being built with the African Union. There are challenges, of course, inherited by also our past. Something we didn't talk much about. Africa is young. The rest of the world is aging. So that puts us in a very privileged position. We have to understand that. Of course, we have to give them education. We have to give them human rights. They have to participate. But I think the future is ours, if you look into that. And we have to be very strong together. Of course, I mean, it's not in the interest of investors. You prefer to negotiate, separately. But that's what our region is important. The ECOWAS, Morocco want to be part of ECOWAS. You do have the SADC, but they come together as one, as the African Union. And this is important. This is a step forward compared to how spread we were. So this package, in terms of how we're going to define our common interest within the African Union, is something we need to work for. That is extremely important.
Fathallah, you wanted to add something before?
Yes, just because I wanted to find my place here on the podium, because you're talking about superpowers, and you talk to Madam Prime Minister as Africa, and then superpowers. I'm not finding my position here. So I just want to say I'm not a superpower.
Of human rights and try to promote growth. We need to work together as Africans, and this is I think the vision that we must have today. Partnership and solidarity. But we don't start blaming the others and not doing our own homework. This is my comment.
Okay, that's most of a comment. Since we're here, you want to ask quick?
For me, I think this is a very, very important subject today. And I will thank all of them, particularly the Prime Minister, for being very undiplomatic today, which is very good. I think as much as we should blame the developed countries for these lopsided economic relations that we have and human relations, we have to go yes. How, and I will emphasize this all the time, why we should still maintain if you see the volume of products that leave Africa unprocessed, without value, to Europe and then being re-exported to Africa, and comparing it with the aid that is coming from Europe, what we are losing far more exceeds what the aid that is given to us. And we have the intelligence. Why can't we not solve it for 60 years? And unfortunately, now the biggest and most lucrative profit-making venture is to kill people. You go to the bushes in Casamance, to Ivory Coast, to Sierra Leone, to Liberia, to the most remote areas in Africa. If you are a rebel or somebody who wants to kill people, you have access to arms. But it's difficult. People are starving. They couldn't have access to a bag of rice. But the AK-47, the tank, how much does it cost? I've had the developed world fighting against money laundering, human trafficking. But I have never talked and make profit from killing people? Where is the sanity? Where is the religious beliefs? Where is our humanity? These are some of the facts that we should address. If not, we will continue to lose, and Africa has now got to stand up and make sure we bargain as equals and not as still subjects of the emperor. Thank you.
Madam Prime Minister, you're from one of the most peaceful countries on the continent. An election to here peaceful. Mr. John talked about the race.
It's an issue that he raised worldwide. Some economists believe that if you remove the industry of war, that's how I call it, you would have an economic recession in some countries. Some countries, the economy are fueled by, what they call the military industry. So this is a fact of life. But yet, I do think we have made a lot of progress, Mr. Minister, in Africa, in dealing with good governance and human rights, much more than many countries in the world. That's in Africa that you find the highest rate in this continent. That's Rwanda first. Countries. So sometimes we are too harsh on ourselves. I do think. We are making progress. We are moving forward faster than it is said. That's an untold story. If you look into where we're coming from 1960, I was born 2 years later, so it's not that old. Yeah? And we have made so much progress in between. We have increased life expectancy. We move from 10% of people who knows how to read and write to universal education, for primary at least. We have, yet we have some progress to be made. And sometimes we don't look into what's happening into other places. We have lessons to give to many countries in Asia when it comes to human rights, when it comes to equalities. So let's also be proud of what we have done so far, but at the same time, be ambitious and not forget what we need to do, because we have to do the same thing. But when you open the news, and I'm always saddened, Africa is always bad news. Yet, that's the continent where you have the biggest amount of investment, as we said in 2017. That was this continent. That's where you have the highest growth. We have to also invest in that, so the world sees us, because it has a cost. It has a cost when it comes to investing in Africa. Oh, it's not safe. Then we have to increase the rate loan. So it is not going to change if we don't change it, because it's not in the interest of people who are coming to invest. And that is, what I call, the reconnection of our founding fathers, like the Kurumas. I'm not being nostalgic, but that's what they try to sort of develop, and it's important for our youth. If you have young people today dying in how, it's not only sad, but as a politician, I'm ashamed. And we have to tell them, just if you allow me on the situation in Libya, we totally agree. When it's a lawless country, everything happened. But as African, talking about slavery, it's not commonality. It's not like the usual trafficking. It goes down to what we are. And that is very important that our brothers from the North understand that. It cannot be just treated as criminal activities, the way it is seen. So this issue of racism is something that we have to tackle together very strongly. And that was my message, actually. I wanted to.
Thank you, and I'll come back.
Hello? Excuse me, could I just highlight what the Prime Minister has said? Africa is present. From Africa, outside Africa, you see Africa as future in the best case, and many times as problem. Which means that, yes, there are a lot of good stories about Africa that have to be told. And I think that this is many times Africans that are not confident enough to highlight, and they themselves, you yourselves, you see too much the shortcomings. There are shortcomings everywhere, but there are present, are not seen outside Africa, where in the best case, as I say, Africa is the future.
The Senegal, because I saw more articles about the new airport in Senegal and the promise of that, not only for Senegal, but for the region. And of course, it's directly connected to the fact that Senegal has good governance and doesn't have the conflicts we see in other places. So I think that's a positive PR example for you.
Thank you very much, Karen. We have a question, please.
Yes. Hello, my name is Zainab. I have a question to all of you. I would like your thoughts on, I mean, the question is about security, and it's coming down. I witness it, you know, like, great to have big companies. Companies in this case, you know, the Niger soil is very rich, like extracting uranium. Great. They're offering jobs, fantastic. However, a big problem we faced is they hired young Nigerians for 6 months. They offered them jobs, and then they were fired. Then we had to deal with youth who were more frustrated than they were at the first time because they were unemployed. And then they got a job, and then they were fired after 6 months. And who are the groups operating in Niger? You have Mali, you have such as in the region. So this is a big change. I'm not against big companies. I'm not against, you know, it's great they offer jobs, but we need to look at this. You go to offer jobs, but at the same time you end up harming the young, and a big security problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lanxin, can you address that? I know we've talked about the fact that China tries to keep hands off in terms of some of these issues, but can you please address that?
Well, that sounds like an issue about private security practice. As far as I understand what the question is, because in Africa or in many other places where China pushing those construction projects, they couldn't get the local military as a, you know, support, just guarding, and actually put in 2 divisions there, basically protect this, you know, so-called Sino-Pakistan economic corridor. But where security you can get? I'm talking about local security. The usual practice is, I think, is an Ed Prince kind of company. That's what they do. Now, then you ask me why hire and fire. I thought, you know, for any company, if they hire those kind of, basically like mercenary guards, I don't see, you know, how that affect the local security. You seem to raise this issue as being a security issue. For companies defending anybody, I'm just thought this is a different issue from what the security issue is.
Question?
My name is Ashraf Swelam. I'm the director of the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding. First, I would like to thank you all. I have a question and a comment. The question is for Ambassador Fathallah and for the European speaker about what the changes that are taking place in Europe right now. Brexit, rise of the right as a result of many reasons, but obviously migration to Europe. How much does that leave space to European politicians to security issues? Then my comment is for the Her Excellency, the Prime Minister. Undiplomatic, but I will do the opposite. I will try to be very diplomatic. As an Egyptian and as an African, I have to say that that narrative that he used in describing the deplorable acts that took place in Libya, and while I totally agree with you, it is, and is not something that sub-Saharan Africa monopolize. It's actually something that is part of our destiny too in North Africa. I find what you said, number one, factually wrong, because I don't know of a single Northern African country that did not come out actually dangerous, because it plays into the whole narrative that there is a sub-Saharan Africa and then there is those countries hanging somewhere in the middle between Europe and Africa called North Africa. It's a distinction that I will tell you, as somebody who works on peace and security issues, that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all of these organizations don't recognize. They jump from Mali to Algeria, and they don't recognize these borders that some people are trying to draw in our heads to make a separation between what is North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. And to be completely honest, and while trying to remain diplomatic, I find it offensive, as a matter of fact. I mean, I think of the thousands of Moroccan, Egyptian peacekeepers in conflicts. That kind of separation, in my mind, is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I prefer to address the first part. Yes, we do face challenges related to the evolutions within Europe, as you very rightly analyzed. Also, one has to recognize the different evolutions in our part of the world, in southern Mediterranean, not to be mentioning only this part, but I think it only strengthens, I'm sure you would agree, Anna, it only strengthens the feeling that together we are stronger. Together we are stronger. Very cynical perspective, if you allow me to say so, that these opposite winds, we have to deal with it as a structural dimension, because we have seen over the decades that we are always waiting for environment to be better and maybe even perfect in order to start building a regional dimension of things. But we see that this perfect environment is hardly arriving, and sometimes we have to face rather increasing challenges than decreasing. We opposite winds, but these, and this is what I see and what I feel now, lead to the conclusion that we have to even work hard on this idea that together we are stronger, and that yes, Europe, the Mediterranean, Africa, all of Africa should continue building a common vision, and then knowing that with a pragmatic approach, with probably time, because it will not come overnight, also a certain number of achievements that we would love to reach, it will not come overnight, but together we are stronger. And I think, and I'm just sharing with you, this is what I feel also in all of North African countries.
About 10 minutes left, but I know that our friend from Egypt challenged your characterization, Madam Prime Minister, of what happened in Libya. So I want to give you a few seconds to respond.
Well, there is nothing authentic about discussing to begin with. That's by discussing that we understand each other. So sorry if you feel uncomfortable with it, but that's the way it is. We need to discuss to be able to solve issues. That's what this forum is all about in philosophy. To come that we have racism all over the world. We all do have racism. Have racism everywhere. So I don't see how we can erase that. The issue is not there. The issue is, how are we going to build a momentum to get rid of what I consider as being middle-age practices. And when you talk about slavery, and I think maybe people should, follow up the discussion in the continent, it has a negative impact in building and reinforcing relationships. That is a fact of life. You cannot point the issue. You want, find the right strategy to but to do so, you have to identify the issues. The images that was in CNN had a tremendous negative impact in sub-Saharan Africa. We do have our regional groupings. We are ECOWAS, we are SADC. We are not part of the Arab League because we are not Arab. But that's the reality of facts. We should just relax and understand that in this type of forum, we have to address issues in order to move forward. And I think that work together, as a community of humans, and move beyond the problem. But when any problem about that statement, it's okay.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. We'll take 3 questions in a row. We'll start with the gentleman here, and then we'll take the young lady here, and then if someone can help me with a microphone to this gentleman over here, then we can hear the 3 comments, and then we'll turn it to the panel.
Okay, thank you. I am Eric from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I'm an emerging young leader of this year's cohort. I've got a small comment and then a question. My first comment is Africa have been the African leaders themselves, the presidents. And yet, there is very little development. And we are very vocal on what happens between Europe and Africa, but we tend to be quiet when we see xenophobia in South Africa, or when we saw Congolese from one side of the river being kicked away to the other side. We don't hear much about that. But my question is linked to the theme. The theme is the superpower in Africa. Right after the independence, I'm tempted to think that the superpowers invested in strong military states, in strong men. Then after the war, they seem to have invested a lot into oppositions, democratic party, the alternative political offer. But recently, and my question goes to Your Excellency Aminata Touré, because Senegal has been at the forefront of that new way of doing things. Recently, I'm tempted to think that the superpowers are not directly investing into civic engagement and youth movement. The likes of Y'en a marre in Senegal, the likes of Balai Citoyen, Filimbi or Lucha in my country. So this has been the new rule of engagement. And I would like to know what is your take on this, because I believe the solution for actual and at last development for the continent. Thank you.
Before the Prime Minister answers, let's...
Hello everyone, my name is Dunia, I'm from Morocco. And since we're talking about geopolitics, I just wanted to point something out, because sometimes we have like these nice forums and everything, and then 10 years after we watch some documentary and we see how things are really done. What I mean is that I'm talking about insurance because I'm referring to colonialism that has been pointed out a lot of times. Colonialism is in the past, but there is 2 kinds of modern colonialism, the one that is state-to-state colonialism, but also the one that some big countries, because they have like the size and they have like the power to pressure them. Is lower if not stops. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, even if we have like this kind of pressure, this is also to get out of the victim zone. We as Africans, as any countries and as any human beings, we have to stop to feel like victims. we need to have like these political leaders that do not sell their countries for that cheap. One. Two, we also need like young people, like citizens, engaged to civil society, that build, that have a project in their countries, that engage, that sometimes on a political level circle. What I mean by young is like young by age or by mindset. So it is our time to have like this different narrative and to write it ourselves.
Okay. Great, thank you. There's a comment back here.
Hello, my name is Maudou Mbaye-Diawang. I'm from the Ministry of Agriculture, the Gambia. My question goes to Madam Prime Minister. You touched on a very important issue here. That is how we package ourselves as a group. More than 10 years since NEPAD actually was packaged together, and out of it, you know, for those of us in agriculture, we got the development program, CADP. Now, what's your assessment at this stage, and what needs to be done going forward? Because you know, the first NEPAD, the first CADP, we had the Maputo Declaration of 10% budgetary allocations, you know, for all African countries. We have woefully failed, you know, and you can see the reason why my minister is so energized, you know, about painting a little bit of a negative picture there. And then going to my lady from U.S., you see the issue of Obama, the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, GAFSIP, was the brainchild of Obama's It actually was trying to mobilize $1 billion. And guess what? We have learned that this Treasury Department wants to withdraw.
What's your question? We're almost out of time.
The
Please.
Treasury Department in U.S. wants to withdraw its funding for this important, you know, GAFSIP program that was initiated by Obama. And I don't know what's your take, you know, on how we can try to solve this situation. Thank you.
We'll take our last question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Cristian Leffler from quick questions. One relates to the discussion about the victims of trafficking and maltreatment in Libya. Not a new situation. We've been working together with the United Nations, IOM, UNHCR, the Libyan authorities, to try to address it for over a year. Our two main difficulties was one, access to the camps, two, engagement from the African countries of origin of those migrants. Why did it take, and that's my question there, why did it take 3 minutes of CNN footage to get the African countries to step up to the plate and look after their citizens? The other question comes back to the theme of this panel and Africa. Europe is not a superpower, it doesn't want to be one. It does want to be a partner to Africa. Our choice has been very much to engage and try to work in a structural fashion. Is that misguided? Should we have been much more focused, as some of the other superpowers are, on individual countries?
Thank you. Before we answer, the panelists answer the questions, each will have about 30 seconds to pick which question they want to address. But before then, we want to go finally to Spot Me, our last Spot Me question. If our friends from Spot Me can put up the question, which has to do with, after hearing this discussion, what should Africa do? Which superpower should Africa, China, the Mediterranean, regardless of EU, or none at all? On the conversation. Just about 30 seconds left, so we can get your take on the conversation that we've just had. And we're about to see the results. There is So why don't we start with Karen? Karen, do you want 30 seconds, and we'll wrap up. 30 seconds with answering any of the questions you heard, or if you want to else. Discussion.
Okay, very specific question about Treasury defunding an Obama administration program. I think that President Obama cared deeply about Africa, and I think the 2014 summit with African leaders was a high point in terms of how you keep any of those programs continuing to be funded. Look to the U.S. Congress. I think that's where you're going to want to try to influence funding decisions. The budget request is in, and it will be up to members of Congress to make those decisions about putting funding for specific programs back in and make the case why it's important. My broader comment is the U.S. didn't do too well in that survey, but I think that it underscores something fundamental that several panelists said, which is that in Africa by Africans. And I think whether you're American, Spanish, Chinese, any of us not in the futures that we create for ourselves, and that is certainly true for Africans as well. So go Africa.
Thank you very much, Karen. We'll move to Anna.
Okay, well, I'm going to respond to the Egyptian gentleman. I don't know if he has left, but anyway, Africa future belongs to Africans, and you are the ones that have to establish strategy. As for the European Union, he has highlighted that because of Brexit and because of the rise of the extreme right and all that, and migrations, this was going to hamper. This is in order to address these issues, and that this mindset, the Ambassador Sijilmassi has very well put it. Its collaboration is addressing common challenges, and for Africans, it's in the African hands, but I think that notwithstanding ECOWAS and the other, and honestly, I spoke about spaghetti bowl of regional organizations, it's with all respect and in a shorthand, but you need to transcend. I think that you have to bet on African Union, and the dialogue will be European Union, which is not a superpower, it's a different game with African Union. And frankly, that Morocco read the African Union just makes it the partners of choice. Before Morocco was there, African Union was incomplete, let's put it that way. So I think that we are at a good juncture between the northern side of the Mediterranean, Europe, and the southern side of the Mediterranean, Africa. And I have highlighted the Mediterranean because this is where so many things are happening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
I'm optimistic about Africa. I'm optimistic because I'm determined to build on the assets of our continent. Union with China, with the US, will come from our strengths, not from the strengths of the partnerships, but from the strengths of our continent. The stronger we are, the stronger the partnerships will be, because it's 1 + 1 = 3. And in that perspective, I believe in the power of now. I think we should stop being hostage of the past. We have to look ahead. I am 51 years old, but I already represent a generation with colonialism. It has no, we see the future, the present that starts now. And if I believe in the power of now, I believe in the power of action, I believe in the power of youth, engagement, commitment, and I totally agree with what you said. And I don't believe in victimization. I believe in determination. We have the assets. We have to win. And by the way, we have to win the World Cup.
You are indeed optimistic.
No, just two very quick takeaway from this. One is if going alone is the favorite one, if that does not mean isolation, he's probably the most happy to see that, because for centuries Chinese tried to resist. And they seem to be working so far. So no problem. The second quick takeaway, I'm a little suspicious about EU rate. Probably reflect Francophone Africa. I'm sorry, I've been following all these posts. You know, CN Pew, I never seen EU is ahead of China. I never seen that.
Okay. And Madam Prime Minister?
Well, I totally disagree with Mr. Ambassador. Senegal has to win the cup.
I said Africa.
Well, then we agree. And to our African friends, stopping being apologetic. You know, we have to say things the way we think they are. That's the best way to deal with them. When there are issues, we put them on the table. We also learn from the others. That's also something that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. And I like to also congratulate the OCP Policy Center for all this wealth of knowledge that we share over the 3 days. For somebody like me, it's like reading 20 books in 3 days, you know, from jumping to different workshops. So that's the way I see the world moving forward. We don't look at your current for anything, but this is the situation that we have. And it takes a community of people like the ones in the rooms, intellectual, practitioners, young people, to define a new future. And that's the way I see things going in Africa. And I want to make an appeal to young people, African young people. They do have the advantage of being in times where you can share technology, you can share knowledge, you can interact in such a way that we never were able to do. These are opportunities that we have to grab, but with in mind, you know, fair. The new DV, what we call the Superpowers, which is a weird term, I agree, but vis-a-vis our partners, let's put it that way. And the best way to do it, I totally agree with you, Madam Minister, African Union, 54 countries, but the sub-region also are important, because these are monetary communities also. We do have the CFA, you know, among the 17 countries of UMOA. So these are, you know, the way to go forward, and I totally agree. I'm greatly optimistic, but I'm not in denial neither. The issues are there to be dealt for.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. It's a great way to remind everyone that the young people will be out in the break area. So please, and please join me. Thank you all very much. I believe there is a break now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a coffee break of 20 minutes. The In Focus sessions will start at 4 sharp in the ballroom for the energy mix to promote Africa's development, and in the Moroccan tent for how to promote regional integration in Africa. Please check your agenda on the AD Connect application for more details. Thank you.